The last rays of sunset painted Rattlesnake Valley crimson as 6 men lay bound in the dust, their faces pale with terror. Above them stood a woman in weathered riding leathers, her silver-streaked hair catching the dying light. Folks would later say that the most dangerous person in Rattlesnake Valley wasn't the outlaws or the rattlers. It was the quiet widow who ran the Silver Creek stables. But nobody believed that, not until the Murphy gang burned down her barn and learned why they once called her the Ghost Rider of Justice. Before we jump back in, tell us where you're tuning in from, and if this story touches you, make sure you're subscribed, because tomorrow I've saved something extra special for you. Sarah McKenzie's morning began like any other at Silver Creek stables, with the methodical precision that had become her armor against the past. The stable yard stretched before her, a testament to 15 years of honest work, every fence post and water trough placed with careful attention. The morning mist still clung to the valley floor, carrying the scent of sage and pine from the surrounding mountains. She moved through her morning routine with practiced efficiency, each step calculated to maintain the image of the respectable widow who'd built this place from nothing. Her rough-worn hands, now more accustomed to grooming, brushes than gun grips, worked steadily as she prepared the horses for the day's customers. The stable's reputation for well-trained horses had spread throughout 3 territories, drawing buyers from as far as Sacramento. But beneath her calm exterior, old instincts never truly slept. Her eyes constantly scanned the horizon, a habit formed during years of leading the most successful posse the Arizona Territory had ever known. The Ghost Riders, they'd called them, 15 hard-riding men and women who'd brought justice to places the law couldn't reach. And at their head had rode Sarah McKenzie, though back then she'd been known by a different name. "Morning, Mrs. McKenzie," Tommy Jensen called out, leading his plough horse through the stable gate. The young farmer's cheerful greeting carried the same mixture of respect and curiosity she'd grown used to over the years. Beautiful morning for working with the horses. Sarah's smile was genuine but measured, carefully maintained like everything else in her new life. "That it is, Tommy. How's that mare's leg healing up?" "Right as rain, thanks to your care. Pa says you've got a way with horses that reminds him of—" Tommy caught himself, reddening slightly. "Reminds him of what?" Sarah's voice remained gentle, though her hand unconsciously brushed against her thigh where a gun belt used to ride. "Nothing, Mum. Just tales from the old days." Tommy hurried past, leading his horse toward the water trough. Sarah watched him go, noting how the morning sun caught the silver threads in her dark hair. 15 years had passed since she'd hung up her badge and gun, since Daniel's death had shown her the true cost of the life they'd led. Her husband had believed in justice, but he'd also believed in mercy, in the possibility of building something that lasted longer than bullet holes and wanted posters. The stable had been his dream originally. A place to help horses and people both, he'd said, those kind eyes crinkling at the corners, where we can build something instead of just chasing down wrongs. He'd died before they could finish it, but Sarah had poured every ounce of her determination into making that dream real. Dr. Rachel Cooper found her in the tack room later that morning, methodically oiling a saddle that had seen better days. The town's physician had been one of the few to recognize Sarah when she'd first arrived in Silver Creek, having treated some of the Ghost Riders years before. But Rachel had kept her secret, understanding the weight of past lives and second chances. "You heard about the Murphy gang?" Rachel asked without preamble, settling onto a hay bale with the ease of long friendship. Sarah's hands stilled on the leather. "Heard they've been moving south from Montana. 3 brothers and their crew, burning their way through honest folks' lives. They hit the Peterson place yesterday, burned the old man's barn, took his horses. Sheriff Hampton's out of his depth, and he knows it. Not my concern anymore." "Rachel, Sarah resumed her work, though her strokes were harder now, more focused. Those days are done. Rachel watched her friend's hands, noting how they moved, with the same precise efficiency they'd once used to load a Winchester. They say the youngest Murphy boys developed a taste for burning things. Likes to hear people beg for mercy before he takes what he wants. The saddle leather creaked under Sarah's grip. The law will handle it. Like they handled the Ghost Riders. I remember those days, Sarah. Remember how you and your posse went where the law couldn't, brought justice to places that had forgotten its meaning. And I remember the cost. Sarah's voice carried the weight of old graves. Remember Daniel, bleeding out in my arms because I thought justice was something you could deliver from the barrel of a gun. Daniel believed in justice, Rachel countered, softly. But he also believed in protecting those who couldn't protect themselves. The Murphy gang's moving closer to Silver Creek every day. What happens when they reach us? Before Sarah could answer, young Tommy burst into the tack room. His face flushed with excitement. Mrs. McKenzie, riders coming down from the North Pass, looked like hard men leading stolen horses. Sarah rose smoothly, her movement betraying none of the warrior's grace that had once made her legend. "Get word to Sheriff Hampton," she ordered, her voice carrying the natural command she'd never truly lost. "And Tommy, make sure everyone clears the street. Some kinds of trouble, best to let them pass through." But as she watched Tommy run to spread the warning, Sarah felt the old fire stirring in her blood. Daniel had believed in building something worth protecting. The question was, when the time came, would she remember how to be both builder and protector? The morning sun caught the silver in her hair like a ghost's halo, and somewhere in the distance, horses thundered toward Silver Creek, carrying men who had yet to learn why some legends were better left undisturbed. Sarah McKenzie's stables came alive with the dawn chorus, each morning a carefully orchestrated dance she'd perfected over 15 years of peace. The autumn air carried the crisp promise of winter as she moved through the barn's wide aisle, her boots marking a steady rhythm on the wooden planks. Every stall door was checked, every feed bin filled, each task completed with the same precision she'd once used to plan territory-wide manhunts. The main barn stood as the crown jewel of Silver Creek stables, its sturdy beams and sweet-smelling hay testament to Daniel's dream and her determination. Sunlight streamed through the high windows, catching dust motes that danced like memories. In the morning light, the barn's western wall still bore the marks of Daniel's craftsmanship, each board placed with the same care he'd once shown in building their life together. "You've got that look again," Rachel Cooper observed, arriving with her medical bag for her weekly check of the horses. The doctor's eyes, sharp as ever despite the silver threading her dark hair, missed nothing. "The one that says, 'You're seeing ghosts in the shadows.'" Sarah continued brushing down Thunder, a temperamental stallion that only allowed her touch. Her strokes were methodical, each one covering exactly the same distance, like a soldier cleaning a rifle. "Just thinking about the Peterson place," she admitted. "Old Jim didn't deserve what happened to him." Rachel leaned against the stall door, watching her friend's movements. To most, Sarah appeared simply thorough in her work, but Rachel recognized the controlled efficiency of someone who'd spent years ensuring every action served a purpose. "Sheriff Hampton's deputized some local boys," she offered. "Think they'll be enough if the Murphy gang decides to pay us a visit." The brush never faltered in its rhythm, though Sarah's jaw tightened imperceptibly. "Town's got law now, Rachel. Different from our days in the territories. Civilization's supposed to mean something. Civilization meant something to the Petersons, too." Rachel's voice carried the weight of recent grief. "Didn't stop their barn from burning, or their horses from being stolen. Sometimes the law needs supplemental help." Sarah turned to face her friend, and for a moment Rachel caught a glimpse of the woman she'd once been. The legend who'd led the Ghost Riders through storm and firefight, bringing justice to places where law was just a word in a book. But then Sarah blinked, and she was once again the widow who ran Silver Creek stables. "That life's behind us," Sarah said quietly, returning to her work. "The Ghost Riders served their purpose, but those days are done. Daniel showed me a better way." Thunder shifted restlessly in his stall, picking up on undercurrents of tension. Sarah soothed him with a touch, her hand finding the exact spot that would calm him. Rachel watched the interaction with knowing eyes. "Funny how that stallion only trusts you," she observed, "almost like he recognizes something in you that others miss. The way horses always knew Ghost Riders, even in disguise." Sarah's hands stilled for just a moment. Don't what? "Don't remember how you and your posse saved my life when outlaws took over my first practice in Arizona? Don't recall how you taught me to treat bullet wounds in the field? Skills I still use today. That woman died with Daniel." Sarah's voice was firm, but her hands had resumed their rhythmic brushing as if the routine could ward off memories. "She's nothing but stories now, tales told in saloons by men who weren't there." The morning continued its steady progression. Sarah moved through her tasks with practiced efficiency, checking hooves, measuring feed, instructing young Tommy in the proper way to muck stalls. Each movement was precisely controlled, every task completed with the same attention to detail that had once made her the most successful posse leader in 3 territories. Later, as the sun climbed toward noon, Sarah stood in the small office. She'd built onto the barn's eastern side. Daniel's photograph watched her from its place of honor on the wall, his kind eyes seeming to follow her movements. Beside it hung their marriage certificate, and beneath that, hidden behind a loose board, lay a tin box she hadn't opened in 15 years. The box contained relics of another life, a U.S. Marshal's badge, worn smooth from years of use, a folded, wanted poster with her own face sketched in fading ink, the name Ghost Rider scrawled beneath it, and a letter from Daniel, written the day before he died, speaking of dreams and second chances. A commotion outside drew her attention. Through the office window, she watched Tommy attempting to calm a nervous mare. The boy's movements were uncertain, his approach too direct. Without conscious thought, Sarah found herself moving, her steps silent despite the creaky floorboards. "Easy now," she called, her voice carrying the same quiet authority that had once commanded 15 of the territory's toughest peace officers. "You're thinking like a farmer, Tommy. Need to think like a horse." She demonstrated the proper approach, her movements fluid and precise. The mare settled immediately, recognizing something in Sarah's bearing that spoke of natural command. Tommy watched with undisguised admiration, unaware that he was witnessing skills honed in pursuits far more dangerous than horse training. "You make it look so easy, Mrs. McKenzie," he said, shaking his head in wonder, "like you can read their minds or something." Sarah patted the mare's neck, remembering other times when reading the movement of horses had meant the difference between life and death. "Nothing magical about it, Tommy. Just experience. You learn to read signs, to see what's coming before it arrives." As if summoned by her words, a hot wind gusted down from the north, carrying with it the faint scent of smoke. Sarah's head turned slightly, old instincts noting wind direction, strength, distance. Somewhere out there, the Murphy gang was moving closer, leaving ash and grief in their wake. She felt Rachel's eyes on her from across the yard, knowing her old friend had caught the subtle shift in her posture. For a moment, Sarah allowed herself to remember the weight of a gun belt, the feel of a badge pinned to her chest. Then she deliberately turned back to Tommy's lesson, pushing away thoughts of smoke and justice. But as she demonstrated proper grooming technique, her hands moved. With the same measured precision, that had once made her the most feared pursuer in the territories. Some skills, it seemed, never truly faded. They just waited, like sleeping ghosts, for the right moment to awaken. Preparing and narrating this story took us a lot of time, so if you are enjoying it, subscribe to our channel. It means a lot. To us. Now back to the story. The Murphy gang arrived in Silver Creek like storm clouds rolling down from the mountains, their approach heralded by the thundering of hooves and the glint of gunmetal in the midday sun. Sarah stood in the stable doorway, counting riders with the automatic precision of someone who'd spent years gauging threats. 8 men total, the 3 Murphy brothers up front, 5 hard-looking riders following behind, and several stolen horses trailing on lead ropes. Malcolm Murphy, the eldest, rode point on a massive black stallion. His face bore the weathered lines of a man who'd spent too many years letting hate shape his features. Beside him, middle brother James sat his horse with the easy grace of a career criminal, while young Travis Murphy, barely 20, fidgeted with a box of matches, his eyes darting between buildings with the fevered intensity of someone looking for something to burn. The town grew quiet as they passed, shopkeepers stepping inside, mothers hurrying children off the street. Sarah noted each detail with clinical detachment. The way Malcolm's right hand never strayed far from his holster. How James kept scanning. Rooflines for threats. The nervous energy in Travis that spoke of violence barely contained. She'd seen their type before, in another life. Men who mistook fear for respect, who built their reputation on others' suffering. "Mighty fine stable you got here, ma'am," Malcolm called out as they drew even with her position. His voice carried the false courtesy of a predator sizing up prey. "Heard tell it's the finest horse trading operation in 3 territories." Sarah kept her stance relaxed, her hands visible and empty, the widow's pose she'd perfected over 15 years. "We do honest trade here, Mr. Murphy, nothing more." Malcolm's eyes narrowed slightly at her use of his name. "Our reputation precedes us, I see. News travels." Sarah's voice remained steady, though her mind was already calculating distances. Engel's potential threats, as does word of burned barns and stolen horses. Young Travis laughed, the sound sharp as breaking glass. "Ain't our fault if folks don't understand proper business negotiations." "Right, Malcolm?" His fingers continued to play with the matchbox, the rhythmic clicking setting Sarah's teeth on edge. James Murphy spoke up then, his tone carrying the smooth menace of a snake in tall grass. "Speaking of business, we might be interested in some of your stock, that bay stallion in the paddock, for instance. What's your asking price?" "That horse isn't for sale." Sarah's response was immediate, though she kept her tone even. The bay stallion had been Daniel's last project, a reminder of everything they'd built together. "Everything's for sale, widow," Malcolm replied, the courtesy dropping from his voice like a discarded mask. "Just depends on the motivation of the seller." His hand rested more deliberately on his gun belt now, the threat clear as mountain air. The moment stretched taut as a drawn bowstring. Sarah felt old instincts stirring, muscle memory from countless standoffs rising to the surface. The distance to her office, where a Winchester rifle lay hidden beneath loose floorboards, was exactly 12 paces. She'd measured it often enough, though she told herself it was simply habit rather than preparation. The tension broke as Sheriff Hampton appeared at the end of the street, flanked by his young deputies. The lawman's star caught the sunlight as he approached, though Sarah noted how his hand trembled slightly near his holster. Hampton was a good man, but he'd never faced men like the Murphys, killers who'd learned their trade in border wars and prison yards. "Afternoon, gentlemen," Hampton called out, his voice carrying forced confidence. "Don't recall sending out invitations to Silver Creek." Malcolm turned in his saddle, treating the sheriff to a smile that never reached his eyes. Free country, ain't it? Just passing through, doing some honest horse trading." He gestured toward Sarah's stable. "The widow here was just about to discuss terms for that bay stallion." "Mrs. Mackenzie's stables are under town protection," Hampton declared, though Sarah could see the relief in his posture when Malcolm's attention shifted away from her. "We don't want any trouble here." "Trouble?" James affected an innocent expression that fooled no one. "Why, Sheriff, we're legitimate businessmen. Ask anyone in Montana Territory. Well, anyone still standing." Travis snickered at this, and Sarah caught the telltale signs of barely restrained violence in his bearing. The boy was wound tight, eager for an excuse to unleash the chaos he carried inside. She'd seen his type before, in her Ghost Rider days, young killers who burned bright and fast, leaving devastation in their wake. 2 hours, Hampton announced, trying to project authority he didn't quite feel. "You can water your horses and rest, then you ride on. Silver Creek isn't looking." 4 new residents. Malcolm's smile widened, showing too many teeth. "Now, Sheriff, that's not very hospitable. We might just decide to stay a while, get to know the fine folks hereabouts. Ain't that right, Travis?" The youngest Murphy's hand strayed to his saddlebag, where Sarah could see the outline of a glass bottle, the kind used for coal oil. Her fingers itched for a weapon, but she maintained her widow's pose, watching and remembering. These men had no idea they were being measured by someone who'd once hunted far more dangerous prey across 3 territories. "We'll see ourselves situated at the hotel," Malcolm announced, finally turning his horse away. "Been a pleasure, widow. We'll talk more about that horse later." The threat in his voice was clear as a mountain stream. As the Murphy gang moved down the street toward the hotel, Sarah caught Rachel's eye across the way. The doctor's expression matched her own thoughts. Silver Creek's peace was about to be sorely tested. The only question was whether Sarah McKenzie, respectable widow and stable owner, could maintain her carefully built facade when the storm finally broke. Inside her chest, the heart of the Ghost Rider began to stir, awakened by the scent of approaching violence. Some legends, it seemed, refused to stay buried when justice came calling once again. The afternoon sun cast long shadows across Silver Creek's main street as Sarah methodically checked the stable's defenses. Every door latch, every window catch, every possible entry point received her attention. To anyone watching, she appeared to be performing routine maintenance, but Rachel Cooper recognized the tactical assessment for what it was. "You're scanning sight lines," the doctor observed quietly, helping Sarah repair a broken hinge. Just like in the old days, Sarah's hands never paused in their work. Force of habit, nothing more. But they both knew it was more than habit driving her actions. The Murphy gang had spent the afternoon making their presence felt throughout Silver Creek. James Murphy had visited every business on Main Street, speaking of protection fees and insurance against accidents. Malcolm had stationed men at strategic points throughout town, while young Travis had been seen studying the buildings with unsettling intensity, that ever-present matchbox clicking in his hands. The sun was touching the western mountains when Sarah heard the commotion from the paddock. Tommy's voice rose in protest, followed by cruel laughter that could only belong to Travis Murphy. Sarah moved with controlled precision toward the sound, her steps silent despite the gravel underfoot, another habit from a life she claimed to have left behind. She found Travis and 2 of his men cornering Tommy against the paddock fence. The boy stood his ground, though his face was pale with fear. Daniel's bay stallion paced nervously behind them, sensing the tension in the air. "Said I wanted to see the horse," Travis was saying, that dangerous edge clear in his voice. "Ain't polite to refuse a paying customer." "Mrs. McKenzie said he's not for sale," Tommy managed, his voice barely wavering. "You'll have to speak with her." Travis's hand shot out, grabbing Tommy's shirt front. "Maybe I'm tired of talking to women and boys about business matters." The matchbox appeared in his other hand, flipping open with practiced ease. Maybe it's time to show this town what happens when... Remove your hand. Sarah's voice cut through the scene like a winter wind. She stood at the paddock gate, still wearing her work apron, but something in her bearing made Travis's men step back instinctively. Well, if it ain't the widow herself. Travis didn't release Tommy, though something in Sarah's tone made him hesitate. Come to discuss business properly? Sarah moved forward with measured steps, each movement precise and controlled. I'll say this once, Mr. Murphy. Release my stable hand, leave my property, and we'll pretend this unfortunate incident never happened. Or what? Travis sneered, but his eyes widened slightly as Sarah drew closer. There was something in her, or in the way she held herself, that triggered warning bells in his predator's mind. Or you'll learn why it's unwise to threaten what's mine. The words were simple, but they carried the weight of old violence, of justice delivered at gallop speed across 3 territories. One of Travis's men reached for his gun. Before his hand touched the grip, Sarah's arm moved in a blur of motion. The pitchfork she'd been carrying seemed to leap from her grasp, flying with deadly accuracy to pin the man's sleeve to the wooden fence post. The move was too practiced, too precise to be accident or luck. Travis's grip on Tommy loosened in shock, and the boy wasted no time scrambling away. The youngest Murphy found himself facing Sarah alone, his men too stunned by the casual display of skill to intervene. That's assault, Travis sputtered, his hand straying toward his gun. You just earned yourself... Earned what? Sarah's voice remained calm. But there was something else there now, something that spoke of hard trails and harder justice. Think carefully, boy. You're standing in my stable yard, threatening my people after being warned off my property. Even your brother's pocket judge would have trouble twisting that in your favor. She took another step forward, and despite being shorter than Travis, she seemed to loom over him. Now, I'm going to share some wisdom that was earned at considerable cost. There are 2 kinds of fighters in this world, those who burn things because they can, and those who've seen enough burning to last several lifetimes. Care to guess which one I am? The matchbox trembled slightly in Travis's hand. This wasn't how it was supposed to go. Women and boys were supposed to cower, too. But there was something about this widow that made his throat go dry, that made him remember stories he'd heard about another woman, long ago, who'd brought justice to the territories. This ain't over, he managed, trying to salvage some dignity, as he backed away. Malcolm's gonna hear about this. I'm counting on it. Sarah's smile never reached her eyes. Tell him Mrs. McKenzie sends her regards and a piece of advice. Some horses aren't worth stealing, and some widows aren't worth threatening. After they'd fled, Rachel emerged from the stable shadows where she'd been watching. That was risky, she observed, helping the still-shaking Tommy remove the pitchfork from the fence. Malcolm won't take kindly to his brother being humiliated. No, Sarah agreed, her voice returning to its normal quiet tone, but sometimes you have to establish boundaries early, before the real trouble starts. She turned to Tommy, who was staring at her with a mixture of fear and awe. You did well standing your ground. Daniel would have been proud. Mrs. McKenzie, Tommy hesitated, then pressed on. The way you threw that pitchfork. I've never seen anything like it. Now practice, Sarah replied simply. When you run a stable, you learn all sorts of useful skills. But her hand brushed unconsciously against her thigh, where a gun belt used to ride, and her eyes remained fixed on the horizon where the Murphy gang had disappeared. The sun sank behind Thunder Mountain, painting the sky in shades of blood and gold. In the paddock, Daniel's bay stallion had calmed, but Sarah's nerves remained tuned to the pitch of approaching violence. She'd bought them time, but she knew with cold certainty that the real storm was still gathering strength. Some part of her, The part she'd tried to bury with Daniel whispered that it was time to dig up more than just memories. The Ghost Rider had always known that some battles couldn't be won with just a pitchfork and stern words. As darkness fell over Silver Creek, Sarah McKenzie stood watching the stars emerge, wondering how long she could maintain the widow's mask before the legend. Beneath it demanded to ride again. Night settled over Silver Creek like a heavy blanket, but Sarah McKenzie found no rest. She sat in her office, a single lamp casting shadows across Daniel's photograph, while her fingers traced the edges of the tin box she hadn't opened in 15 years. The confrontation with Travis Murphy had awakened something she'd tried hard to forget, the cold certainty of knowing when violence was inevitable. Rachel Cooper arrived as the midnight hour approached, her medical bag in hand, though they both knew no one was injured. The doctor found Sarah exactly as she'd expected, seated at her desk, the tin box before her, lost in memories of another life. "Malcolm Murphy paid me a visit this evening," Rachel said without preamble, settling into the worn leather chair across from Sarah. "Wanted to know if I'd heard any interesting stories about Silver Creek's widow." Sarah's fingers stilled on the box. "And what did you tell him?" "That you came here after your husband died, built this place from nothing." Rachel's eyes never left her friend's face. But he wasn't interested in that story. He wanted to know about another woman, one who rode the territories 15 years ago, leading a posse that brought justice where the law feared to tread. The lamp flame flickered as Sarah finally opened the tin box. Inside, carefully preserved, lay the badges that told the story Malcolm Murphy sought. U.S. Marshal's stars, territorial deputy credentials, and newspaper clippings that spoke of the Ghost Riders and their legendary leader. "They called us that because we could appear anywhere at any time," Sarah said softly, touching one of the badges. 15 riders, all sworn to justice, moving like spirits through the territories. We went where regular lawmen couldn't, or wouldn't, brought in men that regular posses wouldn't dare touch. Rachel leaned forward, her voice gentle but insistent. "Tell me about Daniel, about how it ended." Sarah's eyes found her husband's photograph, remembering. He was different from any man I'd ever known, a builder, not a destroyer. He saw past the legend of the Ghost Rider to the woman beneath, showed me there was more to justice than just hunting down evil men. She withdrew a folded paper from the box, a marriage certificate, its edges worn soft with handling. "We met when my posse was tracking the Carson gang. Daniel had a small ranch then, offered us shelter. He looked at me and didn't see a legend or a killer. He saw someone who could build something lasting." "But the past found you anyway," Rachel prompted quietly. "Always does." Sarah's voice carried the weight of old grief. 3 years of peace, of building this place. Then the Keller brothers came through. They'd heard rumors about who I was, thought they could use that knowledge to force us to hide their stolen horses. Her hand moved unconsciously to her side, where an old scar marked the memory. "Daniel tried to reason with them. Believed everyone had good in them, if you just gave them a chance. His last words were about mercy, about not letting them turn me back into what I'd been." The night wind rattled the stable windows, carrying with it the memory of gunshots and regret. Rachel waited, knowing her friend needed to find her own way through the shadows of the past. "I honored his wish," Sarah continued finally. "Didn't hunt them down, though every instinct screamed for vengeance. Instead, I buried my guns with my husband and became just the widow who runs the stables. Thought I could leave the Ghost Rider behind forever. And now?" Rachel's question hung in the air like smoke. "Now the Murphy gang's in my town, threatening my people." Sarah stood, moving to the window. The street below was quiet, but she could see lights burning in the hotel, where the Murphys stayed. "Travis was testing us today, seeing how we'd react. Malcolm's too smart to let that go unanswered. They're already asking questions about you in town, Rachel confirmed, about how you handle yourself, about the way you move. James Murphy was in the saloon earlier, buying drinks for anyone who'd talk about the widow who runs the stables. Sarah's reflection in the window glass seemed to shift, showing for a moment the shadow of who she'd been, the woman who'd led 15 riders through storm and gunfire, bringing law to the lawless territories. Daniel wanted me to find peace, she said softly, to build something that would last longer than violence and vengeance. This stable, these horses, they're his legacy, his dream of something better. And if the Murphys try to destroy that dream... Rachel's question carried the weight of certainty. They both knew it wasn't really a question of if, but when. Sarah turned from the window, and Rachel caught her breath. The transformation was subtle but unmistakable. The way her friend held herself, the set of her shoulders, the cold clarity in her eyes. For the first time in 15 years, Rachel saw the Ghost Rider emerging from behind the widow's gentle facade. Daniel believed in mercy, Sarah said, her voice carrying the quiet authority that had once commanded the most effective posse in 3 territories. But he also believed in protecting what was worth protecting. I've spent 15 years honoring the first part of his legacy. Maybe it's time to honor the second. She lifted the marshal's badge from the tin box, its star catching the lamplight like a promise. The Ghost Riders brought justice where the law couldn't reach. We protected those who couldn't protect themselves. Her fingers traced the badge's worn edges. Maybe that's not so different from what Daniel wanted to build here. Rachel stood, understanding the decision that had been made. The Murphys won't expect it, she said. They're looking for the Ghost Rider of legend, the deadly manhunter from the stories. They won't be prepared for someone who's learned to be both protector and builder. No, Sarah agreed, a ghost of a smile touching her lips. They won't. She replaced the badge in its box, but they both knew something had changed. The widow hadn't vanished, but neither had she remained unchanged. Something new was emerging, a protector who understood both justice and mercy, both the gun and the plow. Outside, a coyote's cry echoed off the mountains, wild and free. Soon, Silver Creek would learn why some legends never truly die. They just wait for the right moment to ride again. Dawn painted the mountains gold when Sarah first smelled the smoke. The acrid scent cut through the crisp morning air, carrying with it the unmistakable odor of coal oil and burning wood. She was moving before conscious thought, muscle memory taking over as her feet carried her toward the stable's main entrance. The sound of approaching hoofbeats mingled with cruel laughter that could only belong to Travis Murphy. Sheriff Hampton arrived as Sarah reached the yard, his face grave in the early light. "Miller's feed store is burning," he reported without preamble. "Started just before sunrise, got most of the inventory out, but the building's lost." Sarah's eyes narrowed, scanning the street with the practiced gaze of someone who'd spent years reading danger in the smallest details. The Murphys. No proof. Hampton's frustration was evident in his voice. Travis and his boys were drinking at the saloon all night, witnesses to verify. Too convenient, if you ask me. Before Sarah could respond, the thunder of approaching horses resolved into Malcolm Murphy and his men, riding hard down the main street. They pulled up at the stable yard in a cloud of dust, Malcolm's face split in a predator's grin. "Terrible business about Miller's store," he called out, his voice carrying false sympathy. "Strange how accidents happen when proper precautions aren't taken." His eyes fixed on Sarah with calculated intensity. "Speaking of precautions, my brother tells me you and he had a disagreement yesterday about that bay stallion." Sarah stood her ground, noting the positions of Murphy's men with the same precision she'd once used to coordinate ambushes. "No disagreement, Mr. Murphy. Simply stated facts. The horse isn't for sale. Malcolm dismounted with fluid grace, his spurs ringing against the packed earth. See, that's where you're wrong, widow. Everything's for sale. Everything can burn. Just a matter of finding the right motivation. The threat hung in the air like gunsmoke. Hampton's hand strayed toward his holster, but Malcolm's men had already spread out, covering the sheriff from multiple angles. The morning sun caught the gleam of well-oiled weapons, professional killers ready for violence. Now, Malcolm continued, his courtesy wearing thin, let's discuss a reasonable price for that stallion before any more accidents occur. Sarah felt time slow, the world crystallizing into sharp focus the way it used to before a firefight. She could see everything with perfect clarity, the way Malcolm's men had positioned themselves, the barely concealed eagerness for violence in their stance. The flash of matches as Travis Murphy emerged from an alley, already playing with his ever-present box. "Sarah!" Tommy's voice cut through the tension, the boy running from the direction of the burning feed store. "Rachel sent me to tell you." He skidded to a stop as he registered the scene before him, fear replacing urgency in his young face. "Well, well," Travis drawled, moving to intercept the boy. "If it ain't the brave stable hand, still got fight in you after yesterday?" His hand shot out faster than Tommy could dodge, catching the boy's arm in a cruel grip. The moment stretched like drawn wire, ready to snap. Sarah watched Travis's fingers dig into Tommy's arm, saw the match he held dangerously close to the boy's sleeve. In that instant, Daniel's voice echoed in her memory. Sometimes mercy means having the strength to act when others won't. "Last chance, Mr. Murphy." Sarah's voice carried the quiet authority that had once commanded the most feared posse in 3 territories. "Release the boy. Take your men and ride out. There's still a way this ends without bloodshed." Malcolm's laugh was ugly as a crow's call. "You threatening me, widow? With what? Your pitchfork?" His hand dropped to his gun belt. "Maybe it's time to show this town what happens when—" His words cut off as Sarah moved. Later, witnesses would struggle to describe exactly what happened. One moment she stood in her work dress, seemingly defenseless. The next, the coiled rope from the fence post had become a whistling arc of hemp that caught Travis's wrist with snake-strike precision, the force spinning him away from Tommy and sending his matches scattering in the dust. Malcolm's draw was fast, reputation making fast. But Sarah was already moving, her body remembering rhythms it had never truly forgotten. The second rope seemed to leap from beside the water trough of its own accord, tangling Murphy's gun hand before his weapon cleared leather. The maneuver was pure Ghost Rider technique, a disarming move she'd perfected in 100 frontier battles. "What the hell?" Malcolm's shock was cut short as Sarah closed the distance between them with 2 fluid steps. Her elbow found the pressure point, beneath his jaw with surgical precision, dropping him to his knees. His men, still processing their leader's sudden vulnerability, found themselves facing the business end of Sheriff Hampton's shotgun. "That's some fancy rope work, Mrs. McKenzie," Hampton observed mildly, though his eyes were wide with newfound respect. "Almost like someone who's had practice bringing in outlaws alive." "Just stable skills," Sarah replied softly, but her stance had changed, shed the widow's gentle pose like an ill-fitting coat. She stood with the balanced readiness of a predator, someone used to controlling violence rather than avoiding it. "Though I learned from the best." Malcolm Murphy looked up at her, recognition finally dawning in his eyes. "Ghost Rider," he whispered, face pale with more than pain. "The stories. Oh, they said you died." "The Ghost Rider did die," Sarah agreed, her voice carrying echoes of frontier justice. "But it seems some legends don't stay buried when good people need protecting." She turned to address his men, her voice ringing with the same command presence that had once driven 15 riders through storm and gunfire. "Drop your weapons, slowly, or discover why they used to say my posse was the last thing outlaws saw before judgment. The sound of guns hitting dirt filled the morning air, punctuated by the growing murmur of gathering townspeople. The widows. Mask had cracked, revealing the steel beneath. Sarah McKenzie stood in the dawn light, neither fully the ghost rider nor completely the widow, but something new, a protector who knew the value of both justice and mercy, who could build with one hand and defend with the other. The feed store's smoke rose black against the morning sky, a reminder that some things were worth fighting for. Sarah felt the familiar weight of responsibility settle around her shoulders, different from her Ghost Rider days, but no less real. Silver Creek had needed a builder. Now it needed a defender. Perhaps, she reflected, as she watched Hampton begin to disarm Murphy's men, it was time to be both. Sarah McKenzie stood in her office as the afternoon sun cast long shadows through the window, her hands steady as she opened the old chest that had remained locked for 15 years. The wood creaked in protest, releasing the scent of gun oil and leather, memories preserved in oak and brass. Inside lay the tools of her former trade, a well-maintained Winchester rifle, twin Colt revolvers, and the distinctive black duster that had once struck fear into the hearts of outlaws across 3 territories. Rachel Cooper watched from the doorway as Sarah lifted each piece with reverent care. Malcolm Murphy won't stay in Hampton's jail for long, the doctor observed. His type always has friends in high places. 3 days at most, Sarah agreed, checking the Winchester's action with practiced efficiency. The weapon moved in her hands like an old dance partner, muscle memory outlasting years of disuse. Long enough for a circuit judge to arrive. Long. Enough for strings to be pulled. The town's talking, Rachel continued, moving to help Sarah lay out the equipment. About what happened this morning. About who you really are. They're scared, but not of you. They're scared of what happens when the Murphys come back with reinforcements. Sarah paused in her inspection of the gun belt, the worn leather soft, beneath her fingers. They should be. Malcolm's pride won't let this stand. He'll gather every cutthroat and killer between here and Montana territory. Then why are you smiling? Because that's exactly what the Ghost Rider would expect him to do. Sarah's voice carried the quiet confidence of someone who'd spent years anticipating her opponent's moves. But I'm not just the Ghost Rider anymore. Daniel taught me that sometimes the best way to win a fight is to change its nature entirely. The afternoon progressed with methodical purpose as Sarah began what she thought of as her transformation. Each movement was measured, combining the widow's careful planning with the Ghost Rider's tactical precision. She cleaned weapons that hadn't seen use since Daniel's death, but her hands remembered every motion, every check and balance that had once kept her alive on the hunting trails. Tommy arrived as the sun began to set, his young face still showing marks of his encounter with Travis Murphy. He stopped short in the office doorway, eyes widening at the arsenal laid out before him. "Mrs. McKenzie, Sheriff Hampton said you needed me." Sarah looked up from where she was adjusting the sight on her Winchester. "Come in, Tommy. It's time you learned some things about running a stable that I haven't taught you yet." She gestured to the chair across from her desk. "Things your father should know too, if you're willing to share them." "Like what happened this morning?" "Me," Tommy asked, settling into the chair with obvious curiosity. "The way you handled those ropes, that wasn't just stable work, was it?" "No," Sarah admitted, setting aside the rifle. "The Ghost Riders developed those techniques for bringing in outlaws alive when possible. Ropes, properly used, can be as effective as bullets and leave less blood to clean up." She paused, studying the boy's reaction. "Your father's got influence with the other ranchers. They trust his judgment. I need you to take a message to him." Tommy sat straighter, pride warring with nervousness in his young face. "About the Murphys coming back?" "About being ready when they do." Sarah's voice took on the tone of command she'd once used to brief her posse before a major operation. The Murphys think they know what's coming. A straight fight between outlaws and a legend. But Silver Creek isn't just a widow's stable or a target for thieves. It's a community, and it's time the community learned to protect itself. Rachel moved to the window, watching as the town began its evening routines. You're not planning to face them alone. The Ghost Rider would have, Sarah acknowledged, strapping on her gun belt with practiced ease. The familiar weight settled against her hip like a long-absent friend. But Sarah McKenzie knows better. Daniel always said true strength comes from building something together, something worth fighting for. She turned to Tommy, her expression serious. Tell your father we're having a meeting tonight after sunset. Here at the stable, every rancher, every shop owner, everyone who has a stake in keeping Silver Creek free from men like the Murphys. It's time they learned what it means to protect their own. Thus, as Tommy hurried off with his message, Sarah continued her preparations. Each item from the chest found its place, not just as weapons, but as symbols of a truth she'd finally understood. The Ghost Rider's skills and the widow's wisdom weren't opposing forces. They were tools to be used in service of something greater. You're planning something, Rachel observed, watching her friend move through the familiar motions of checking ammunition and supplies. Something more than just preparing for a fight. The Murphys expect the Ghost Rider, Sarah confirmed, sliding her restored badge into her pocket. They'll come ready for the legend, bringing numbers and firepower to overwhelm one person. No matter how skilled. A smile touched her lips, combining the widow's gentle wisdom with the Ghost Rider's dangerous grace. But legends can adapt. Daniel taught me that true justice isn't just about hunting down evil. It's about giving good people the means to stand against it. The sun sank behind Thunder Mountain, painting the sky in shades of promise. Sarah McKenzie stood in her office, the Ghost Rider's black duster hanging ready beside her widow's apron, both parts of who she had become. Tonight, Silver Creek would learn that protecting a community required more than just a legendary defender. It needed everyone to find the strength within themselves. As darkness fell, lanterns began appearing in the streets as people made their way toward the stable. Sarah watched them come, each step carrying the weight of decision, of choosing to stand rather than submit. The widow in her saw neighbors, gathering in common cause. The Ghost Rider saw potential deputies in need of training. Together, they would become something the Murphy gang never expected to face, a community ready to fight for its own justice. The pre-dawn air carried a sharp chill as Sarah McKenzie stood in the stable yard, watching the townspeople gather. Shop owners, ranchers, and farmers formed a nervous circle around her, many handling rifles with the uncertain grip of those more accustomed to plows and ledger books. The widow in her noted their determination, despite their fear. The Ghost Rider assessed their potential with a tactician's eye. "First lesson," she announced, her voice carrying the quiet authority that had once commanded the most effective posse. "In 3 territories, a weapon is only as good as the hand that holds it and the mind that guides that hand. We start with basics: stance, breathing, and most importantly, judgment." Tommy's father, James Wilson, spoke up from the crowd. "Oh, with respect, Mrs. McKenzie, we know how to shoot. Been hunting all our lives." Sarah moved with fluid grace, covering the distance between them in 3 measured steps. Before Wilson could react, she had disarmed him, his rifle spinning away. With a move that looked deceptively simple, "Hunting's not fighting," she said softly. "And the Murphys won't be coming here to track deer." She returned his rifle, her movements deliberate, teaching even in this small gesture. "You're all here because you chose to stand rather than submit. Now you need to learn how to stand effectively." Her eyes swept the gathering. The Ghost Riders didn't earn their reputation through superior firepower. We succeeded because we trained harder, thought smarter, and worked together better than any outlaw gang. Rachel Cooper watched from the stable doorway as Sarah began, transforming these civilians into something more. The widow's patience merged with the Ghost Rider's expertise as she corrected stances, adjusted grips, and most importantly, taught them to think differently about conflict. A fight isn't won by who shoots fastest, Sarah explained, demonstrating the smooth draw that had once made her legend. It's won by who controls the situation. The Murphys expect to face either scared townspeople or a lone legend. They won't expect a community that knows how to work together. As the morning progressed, Sarah divided them into groups, assigning roles that played to individual strengths. Pearl Sullivan's sharp eyes made her a natural lookout. The blacksmith's powerful arms proved perfect for the rope techniques Sarah had used against Malcolm. Even young Tommy found his place, his knowledge of the town's back alleys, making him invaluable for planning escape routes and alternate positions. "Your greatest advantage," Sarah continued, moving between groups with measured grace, "is that you know this town. Every alley, every rooftop, every broken board that creaks underfoot. The Murphys will come expecting to fight on their terms. Your job is to make sure that never happens." She demonstrated techniques she'd developed during her Ghost Rider days, adapted now for townspeople defending their homes. Simple signals, coordination methods, ways to support each other without exposing themselves to danger. Each lesson carried the weight of hard-earned experience, tempered by the wisdom she'd gained in 15 years of peace. As the sun climbed higher, Sarah called a break. While the others rested, she moved to the far end of the stable yard, where she'd set up her own training area. The Ghost Rider's skills needed refreshing as much as the townspeople needed learning. Rachel brought water as Sarah worked through movements she hadn't performed in 15 years. The doctor watched her friend transition between draws, rolls, and firing positions with increasing fluidity. "You haven't lost it," she observed. "Some things," Sarah replied, spinning to fire at multiple targets with deadly precision. "The body doesn't forget, but it's different now." She holstered her revolvers with practiced ease. Before, it was all about the hunt, about being faster, deadlier, more relentless than our prey. Now, you're protecting something," Rachel finished, "not just hunting someone." Sarah nodded, her eyes finding the townspeople as they began reassembling for the afternoon session. "Daniel used to say that building something worth defending changes how you think about defense." He was right. The Ghost Rider fought alone, trusted, only her posse. But Silver Creek needs more than just another lone legend. The afternoon brought more advanced lessons. Sarah taught them how to use the town itself as a weapon, how ordinary tools could become advantages, how daily routines could disguise preparations. She showed them how to move between buildings without being seen, how to support each other without bunching up into easy targets. "The Murphys will come with numbers," she explained, sketching positions in the dirt. "But numbers mean nothing. If they're fighting blind, disorganized, and uncertain, your job isn't to outfight them. It's to make them fight on your terms, in your territory, against an enemy they don't understand." As the sun began to set, Sarah watched her impromptu militia practice their new skills. The widow in her saw neighbors coming together, supporting each other, building something stronger than individual courage. The Ghost Rider saw potential, deputies taking shape, ordinary people learning to be extraordinary when circumstances demanded it. "They're coming along faster than you expected," Rachel noted, joining her friend as the practice session wound down. "People can surprise you," Sarah replied, "when they're fighting for something they believe in." She touched the badge in her pocket, feeling the worn edges that had once represented simple justice and now meant something more. The Ghost Rider brought justice to the territories, but maybe Daniel was right. Maybe the best justice is the kind people build together, protect together. The setting sun painted Thunder Mountain in shades of possibility as Sarah's students dispersed to their homes, carrying with them not just new skills, but a new understanding of what it meant to defend their community. Tomorrow would bring more training, more preparation for the storm they all knew was coming. But for the first time since the Murphys arrived, Sarah felt the weight of both her identities settling into proper balance. The widow had taught her the value of building, something worth protecting. The Ghost Rider had taught her how to protect it. Together they would teach Silver Creek to be something no outlaw gang could easily overcome, a community that knew both the price and power of standing together. Silver Creek transformed over the next 2 days, though the changes might not have been obvious to casual observation. Sarah McKenzie watched the subtle shift from her stable's hayloft, noting how ordinary routines now carried deeper purpose. Pearl Sullivan's morning sweep of her store's porch doubled as a surveillance post. The blacksmith's regular testing of horseshoes provided cover for practicing signals with his hammer's rhythm. Even Tommy's daily rounds to water the horses served to maintain a constant patrol of the town's perimeter. "They're adapting faster than I expected," Rachel observed, joining Sarah in her elevated watchpost. "Starting to think like defenders instead of victims." Sarah nodded, her eyes tracking the measured movements of townspeople going about their supposedly normal business. "They're learning what the Ghost Riders knew, that preparation and awareness matter more than speed or strength, though we'll need both before this is done." Word had arrived that morning. Malcolm Murphy had indeed secured his release through legal manipulation, just as Sarah had predicted. More concerning were the reports from outlying ranches of riders gathering in the hills, hard men with hard reputations, answering Malcolm's call for reinforcements. "How many do you think he'll bring?" Rachel asked, though she suspected she knew the answer. "As many as his pride demands," Sarah replied, descending from the hayloft with fluid grace. "The Ghost Rider humiliated him. He'll want enough men to overwhelm any resistance, to make an example of Silver Creek." She paused, adjusting the gun belt that now rode openly on her hip. "But numbers won't matter if we control how they're used." The morning's training session demonstrated how far the townspeople had come. Sarah watched as James Wilson led his group through the rope-handling drills she'd taught them, their movements showing growing confidence. Pearl Sullivan's team had mastered the art of communicating through seemingly casual gestures, coordinating their positions without obvious signals. "Remember," Sarah called out, moving among them with the measured pace of someone who'd spent years leading others into danger, "the Murphys expect to face either scattered resistance or a lone legend. They won't be prepared for organized opposition. Your job is to keep them off balance, to make them fight blind while supporting each other." The widow's wisdom merged with the Ghost Rider's tactical experience as she refined their preparations. Each citizen's daily routine was examined and adjusted, transforming ordinary activities into elements of defense. The stable itself became their command center, its familiar layout providing natural cover and clear lines of sight. "Mrs. McKenzie," Tommy called from his lookout position near the water tower. "Riders coming in from the east, just 2 of them." Sarah noted how quickly the townspeople moved to their assigned positions, no panic or confusion in their responses. Pearl's casual sweeping picked up pace slightly, her eyes scanning the approaching riders. The blacksmith's hammer fell with measured beats, signaling readiness to others out of sight. The riders proved to be James Murphy's men, carrying what they claimed was a peace offering. Sarah met them in the street, positioned so that Pearl's shooters had clear lines of sight from the store's upper windows. "Mr. Murphy sends his respects," the lead rider announced. His attempt at diplomacy transparent as glass. "Says there's been a misunderstanding. He's willing to discuss reasonable terms for everyone's benefit." "Is he?" Sarah's voice carried the quiet authority that had once commanded the most feared posse in 3 territories. And what terms would those be? Simple ones. He gets the bay stallion, as originally discussed. The town agrees to reasonable protection fees. And you, ma'am. The rider's smile didn't reach his eyes. You ride out, never to return. Do that, and there won't be any need for unpleasantness. Sarah studied them with the cold calculation of the ghost rider, while the widow in her noted how her townspeople maintained their positions, ready but not obvious. "Take a message back to Mr. Murphy," she said finally. "Tell him Silver Creek isn't interested in terms. Tell him what he saw before was just a taste of what's waiting. And tell him." She let her duster fall open, revealing the twin colts at her hips. That the ghost rider didn't earn her reputation by running from fights. After the riders departed, Rachel joined her friend in the street. "You know they were really here to scout our defenses." "Of course," Sarah agreed, watching the dust trail of the departing riders. "Just as I know they won't see what they expect to see. Look around, Rachel. What do you see?" The doctor surveyed the town thoughtfully. People going about their business. Nothing that looks like preparation for a fight. Exactly. The ghost riders used to say that the best ambush is the one your enemy walks into while looking for something else. Malcolm will get reports of a town carrying on normally, maybe a bit nervous, but not organized. His pride won't let him see the truth until it's too late. The day progressed with steady purpose. Sarah continued refining their preparations, teaching them to move like her old posse had moved, like ghosts that could appear and disappear at will. The stable's interior was transformed into a flexible command post, with clear escape routes and fallback positions. As evening approached, Sarah gathered her impromptu militia for final instructions. "Tomorrow," she announced, her voice carrying, "to every corner of the stable, Malcolm Murphy will return with every gunman he could hire. He'll expect to find either a town cowering in fear or a lone legend making a final stand. Instead, he'll find something he's never faced before, a community that knows how to fight as one." The setting sun painted Thunder Mountain in shades of promise as Sarah McKenzie watched her people disperse to their positions. The widow's compassion and the ghost rider's determination had forged something new in Silver Creek, a town that understood both the price and power of standing together. Tomorrow would bring violence, but they would face it not as victims or vigilantes, but as defenders of something worth protecting. Dawn had barely touched Thunder Mountain when Sarah McKenzie detected the first signs of trouble. A dust cloud approached from the north, too large for casual travelers, too organized for a random group. She stood in her stable doorway, the widow's apron still tied around her waist, while the ghost rider's guns rode comfortably on her hips. 12 riders, Tommy reported from his concealed position in the hayloft. "Malcolm and James Murphy up front. Don't see Travis with them." Sarah's eyes narrowed at this detail. The youngest Murphy's absence spoke volumes about Malcolm's strategy. "He's keeping Travis in reserve," she murmured to Rachel, who stood ready with her medical bag. "Probably sent him around to approach from another direction. Sound the first signal." Pearl Sullivan's broom clattered against her store's wooden steps in a seemingly careless pattern, but the sound carried clear meaning to those who'd learned to listen. Within moments, the town's defensive network activated with subtle efficiency. Shopkeepers casually adjusted their window displays, positioning themselves behind prepared coverage. The blacksmith's hammer rang out in measured beats, confirming readiness from the west side of town. The Murphy gang rode into Silver Creek with the deliberate pace of men who expected no real resistance. Malcolm sat his horse with rigid formality, his pride still smarting from his previous encounter with the widow. James rode beside him, scanning rooflines and windows with professional caution while their hired guns spread out in a pattern that spoke of experience in town takedowns. "Quite a reception committee," Malcolm called out, reining his horse to a stop before the stable, "though I notice most folks seem to be going about their business. Smart of them." Sarah stepped forward, letting her duster fall open to reveal her guns. The morning sun caught the silver threads in her hair, making them shine like strands of steel. "Last chance to ride away, Mr. Murphy. Silver Creek isn't the easy target you think it is." Malcolm's laugh carried no humor. "No? I see a town full of farmers and shopkeepers, a few scared deputies, and one woman living on borrowed reputation." He gestured, and his men began dismounting with practiced coordination. The Ghost Rider might have been something to fear 15 years ago, but legends fade. Times change. "Duggy, yes," Sarah agreed, her voice carrying the quiet authority that had once commanded the most effective posse in 3 territories. "They do. Sometimes they change in ways you don't expect." The signal came as a dropped water bucket, the clatter seemingly accidental, but it launched a sequence of events that transformed the quiet street into orchestrated chaos. Pearl's casual sweep of her porch suddenly blocked 2 gunmen's line of sight. The blacksmith's mounted customers turned out to be Wilson and his ranchers, their rifles appearing as if by magic. Malcolm's men found themselves caught in carefully prepared crossfire zones, though no shots had yet been fired. Every move they made to seek better position only pushed them into more vulnerable arrangements. The Ghost Rider's tactical expertise, merged with the widow's knowledge of her town, had turned Silver Creek itself into a weapon. "Impressive," James Murphy admitted, his professional eye recognizing the trap they'd ridden into. "But you forget something. We still have the numbers, the experience, and—" His words cut off as a new sound filled the air, the thundering of hooves approaching fast from the east. Travis Murphy burst into view, leading another group of riders, exactly as Sarah had predicted. But instead of catching the town defenders by surprise, they found themselves riding into prepared positions. Tommy's knowledge of the town's alleys and Rachel's coordination had ensured defenders were ready on all sides. "Now!" Sarah called out, her voice carrying clear command. The townspeople executed their practiced maneuvers with fluid grace. Ropes snapped taut between buildings, catching Travis's riders at chest height. Water barrels crashed from strategic positions, sending horses into panic. The blacksmith's carefully positioned mirrors flashed blinding morning sunlight into gunmen's eyes. Malcolm's draw was impressive, but Sarah had spent 2 days returning to her old form. Her first shot took his gun hand, the second knocked James's weapon away, while her third sent Travis's matchbox spinning into the dust. Each shot was precise, disabling without killing. The Ghost Rider's skill tempered by the widow's mercy. "Remarkable what people can do when they work together," Sarah observed, keeping her gun trained on Malcolm as the townspeople moved to secure his men. "The Ghost Rider hunted alone, Mr. Murphy. But Sarah McKenzie built something stronger than any legend, a community that knows how to protect its own." The morning sun climbed higher as Sheriff Hampton and his deputies began taking prisoners into custody. Sarah watched the proceedings with the careful eye of someone who knew victory could breed carelessness. This skirmish had been won, but she could read the fury in Malcolm Murphy's eyes. This wasn't over. Rachel appeared at her friend's side, watching the last of the Murphy gang being disarmed. "They'll come back," the doctor warned, "with more men, more firepower." "Of course they will," Sarah agreed, holstering her guns with practiced ease. "Men like Malcolm Murphy can't accept defeat, especially not from those they see as beneath them. But when they return—" She gestured at the townspeople, now moving. With new confidence as they cleared the street, "They'll find that Silver Creek has more surprises waiting." The widow's compassion and the Ghost Rider's tactical brilliance had proven a powerful combination. Sarah McKenzie stood in the morning, light, watching her community work together with practiced efficiency, and felt both sides of herself settling into proper balance. The next battle would be harder, but they would face it together, not as victims or vigilantes, but as defenders of something worth protecting. Victory's sweetness lasted less than a day. Sarah McKenzie stood in the ruins of her stable as dawn painted Thunder Mountain in shades of blood and ash. The night's destruction spread before her like a nightmare made real, charred beams, shattered windows, and the acrid scent of coal oil hanging heavy in the morning air. Travis Murphy had waited until the darkest hour before dawn, when the town's vigilance had wavered slightly after their earlier triumph. His attack had been swift, precise, and devastating. The stable, Sarah's 15 years of careful building, had burned with frightening speed. Most of the horses got out, Rachel reported, her medical bag clutched tight as she surveyed the damage. Tommy and Wilson managed to free them before the fire spread, but Daniel's bay... The doctor's voice trailed off, understanding the deeper loss. Sarah's hand found the charred remnant of the stable post where Daniel had carved their initials. So many years ago, the stallion he'd been training when he died, the last living connection to their shared dream, had been Travis Murphy's first target. The young killer had made sure she heard the animal's screams before setting the rest of the stable ablaze. James Wilson's hurt bad, Rachel continued softly. Took a bullet trying to save the ledgers from your office. He's asking for you. Sarah moved through the wreckage with measured steps, each footfall carrying the weight of both her identities. The widow in her grieved for 15 years of peaceful work, destroyed in a single night. The Ghost Rider assessed the tactical significance of such a precise strike. They found Wilson in Rachel's clinic, his face grey with pain, but his eyes clear. Mrs. McKenzie, he managed as she approached his bedside. I'm sorry. The ledgers. Everything you built. Shh, Sarah soothed, taking his hand. You've nothing to apologize for. You proved what kind of man you are last night. Her voice carried the gentle strength that had made her both respected widow and legendary peace officer. Travis Murphy, Wilson continued, fighting through pain to speak. He wasn't alone. Had maybe 20 men with him. Professional types, not just hired guns, said to tell you. He coughed, and Rachel moved quickly to attend him. Said to tell you this is what happens when legends try to play at being civilized. Sarah's fingers brushed unconsciously against her gun belt, feeling the familiar weight of the Colts that had once made her name feared across 3 territories. Rest now, she told Wilson quietly. You've done your part. Outside the clinic, the town gathered in shocked clusters, their earlier confidence shaken by the night's events. Pearl Sullivan approached as Sarah emerged, her face streaked with soot from helping fight the fire. They hit the Miller place too, Pearl reported, and the Thompson Ranch out by Thunder Creek. It's like they knew exactly where to strike to hurt us most. Of course they did. Sarah's voice was cold as mountain steel. Travis may be wild, but James Murphy's a professional. He'd have studied. Our defenses yesterday noted our strong points and weak spots. This wasn't just revenge, it was strategy. Rachel joined them, wiping her hands on her apron. Wilson will live, but he'll need time to heal. Sarah. This changes things. The town's scared. Some are talking about accepting Murphy's terms. No. The word carried the quiet authority that had once commanded the most feared posse in 3 territories. That's exactly what they want, to break our spirit, make us doubt ourselves. The Ghost Rider would have responded with immediate pursuit and retribution. But we're not just dealing with outlaws anymore. We're fighting for something bigger than revenge. She turned to face the gathered townspeople, letting them see both sides of who she was, the widow who had built something worth defending, and the legend who knew how to defend it. "Listen to me," she called out, her voice carrying across the morning air. "Last night wasn't just an attack on my stable. It was an attack on everything we've built together. The Murphys think they can break us by destroying things we value. But they don't understand what Daniel taught me 15 years ago. That true strength isn't in buildings or belongings, but in the hearts of people who stand together." But what can we do?" Tommy asked, his young face smudged with ash. "They have more men, more guns." "They have numbers," Sarah agreed, "experience, ruthlessness. But we have something they'll never understand." She moved among her people, the Ghost Rider's tactical mind already forming new plans, while the widow's heart reinforced their resolve. "We have a community willing to fight for each other. Wilson proved that last night. Now it's time to show the Murphys what that really means." The morning sun climbed higher, illuminating the stable's ruins and the determined faces of Silver, Creek's defenders. Sarah McKenzie stood among them, feeling both her identities merge into something stronger than either alone. The widow understood what was worth protecting. The Ghost Rider knew how to protect it. Together, they would teach the Murphys the true cost of attacking not just a legend, but a community ready to stand together. "Rachel," she called, her voice carrying new purpose, "gather everyone in the church. It's time to show these outlaws that some fires don't destroy, they forge something stronger." Silver Creek's church had never been so full, even on Christmas Sunday. Sarah McKenzie stood before the gathered townspeople, her black duster replaced by simple riding clothes, but her gun belt still rode comfortably on her hips. The morning light filtered through stained glass windows, casting colored shadows across determined faces. "The Murphys think they've won," she began, her voice carrying the quiet authority that had once commanded the most effective posse in 3 territories. "They believe burning my stable and attacking our outlying farms will break our spirit. But they've made a crucial mistake, one that every outlaw I ever hunted made. They think destroying things is the same as destroying resolve." Rachel Cooper sat in the front pew, her medical bag at her feet, watching her friend seamlessly blend both sides of herself. The widow's compassion tempered the Ghost Rider's strategic brilliance as Sarah laid out her plan. "We let them think. They've won," Sarah continued, moving among her people with measured grace. "Let them believe their night of destruction has accomplished what they wanted. Pearl, spread the word in your store that some folks are talking about leaving town. James, when you're well enough, make it known that the ranchers are considering Murphy's protection fees." "You want us to appear broken," Pearl realized, understanding dawning in her eyes. "More than that," Sarah confirmed. "I want us to appear divided. The Ghost Riders succeeded, not just because we were skilled, but because our targets never knew where we would strike from or how. Now we're going to teach the Murphys that lesson." She unrolled a map of Silver Creek and the surrounding territory on the altar, her movements precise and controlled. "They have numbers and experience, but we have something they can't match: knowledge of our home and each other. Every street, every building, every quirk of weather and terrain can become an advantage if we use it right." The morning progressed as Sarah outlined her strategy, one that drew on both her lives. The widow's intimate knowledge of the town merged with the Ghost Rider's tactical expertise. Each citizen's role was carefully crafted to play to their strengths while appearing to show weakness. "Tommy," she called, and the young stable hand straightened with pride. "Your job might be the most important. I want you to look scared. Let them see you watching their movements, then running to report to me. Make it obvious." "But won't that put you in danger?" Tommy asked, worry creasing his young face. "That's exactly what we want," Sarah explained, her smile carrying echoes of old hunts across 3 territories. The Murphys are waiting for the Ghost Rider to seek revenge. Their whole strategy depends on forcing me into a direct confrontation where their numbers will prevail. Instead, we're going to show them why legends sometimes grow stronger with time. As the sun climbed toward noon, Sarah divided the town into teams, each with specific tasks that looked like retreat but prepared for resistance. The blacksmith began moving his most valuable tools, seemingly abandoning his shop, but really creating firing positions and storage for weapons. Pearl Sullivan started boarding up her store windows, each plank carefully placed to provide coverage while maintaining lines of sight. "Remember," Sarah instructed as they worked, "everything must look like preparation to surrender or flee. The Murphys have scouts watching. Let them see exactly what they expect to see. A community losing heart after a harsh lesson." Rachel joined her friend as the townspeople dispersed to their tasks, each carrying detailed instructions that would transform Silver Creek into something the Murphys would never expect to face. "You're betting everything on them believing their own victory," the doctor observed. "What if they decide to press their advantage before we're ready?" "They won't," Sarah replied with quiet confidence. "Men like Malcolm Murphy savor their triumphs. They'll want to watch us squirm, to see the fear in our eyes when they ride through town. Their pride demands it." She touched the guns at her hips, feeling the familiar weight of both justice and protection. Besides, they're still waiting for the Ghost Rider to react like they expect, with immediate violent revenge. The afternoon brought more subtle preparations. Wilson's ranchers drove their herds closer to town, seemingly seeking safety in numbers, but actually positioning themselves for the defense Sarah had planned. The schoolteacher began holding classes in the church basement, allowing the school building to be quietly converted into a fallback position. As evening approached, Sarah stood in the ruins of her stable one last time. The charred beams and scattered ashes represented everything she'd built in 15 years of peace, everything Daniel had dreamed of creating. But as she watched her, people move with quiet purpose through their preparations, she realized something profound. "Daniel would understand," Rachel said softly, reading her friend's thoughts. "Sometimes building something means being ready to fight for it." Sarah nodded, her hand finding the marshal's badge she now wore openly. "The Ghost Rider knew how to hunt evil men," she replied. "The widow learned how to build something worth protecting. Now it's time to show the Murphys what happens when those lessons come together." The setting sun painted Thunder Mountain in shades of promise as Silver Creek's transformation continued. To outside eyes, it appeared to be a town preparing to submit to inevitable defeat. But Sarah McKenzie knew better. Like the phoenix Daniel used to talk about, something new was rising from the ashes of her stable. A community that had learned to be both builders and defenders, ready to show the soul. Murphy's why some legends only grow stronger when tested by fire. Dawn light crept over Thunder Mountain, revealing a Silver Creek that appeared defeated. Sheets hung in windows like surrender flags. Wagons stood loaded with household goods, and businesses remained shuttered. Sarah McKenzie watched from the church tower as Murphy's scouts observed exactly what they were meant to see. A town preparing to submit. "Last report from the outlying farms," Rachel whispered, climbing the tower steps with practiced quiet. "Malcolm Murphy's gathered at least 30 riders. They're camped in Thunder Valley, probably planning to make their move by noon." Sarah nodded, her eyes never leaving the distant dust clouds that marked the scouts' movements. The widow in her noted how the morning light caught the dew on the grass. The Ghost Rider calculated distances and sightlines. "And Travis?" "Just as you predicted. He's positioning men behind the old mill, thinking we don't know about the tunnel entrance there." Rachel's voice carried quiet satisfaction. "Pearl's youngest saw them moving supplies in before dawn. They think they're being clever." Men like the Murphys always do. Sarah turned from the window, her movement liquid with restored purpose. They see what they expect to see. Is everyone in position? The doctor nodded, reviewing their preparations. Wilson's ranchers had hidden their horses in the creek bed north of town, ready to cut off any retreat. The blacksmith's forge burned low, but the heated metal wasn't for horseshoes. Specialized caltrops lay cooling in oil, ready to be scattered at crucial moments. Pearl Sullivan's boarding house guests were actually sharpshooters from the neighboring towns, positioned to cover every approach. "Tommy's been making quite a show of running messages," Rachel reported with a slight smile, looking appropriately terrified each time. "The scouts are definitely tracking his movements." "Good." Sarah checked her weapons with practiced efficiency, each movement precise and controlled. They'll expect the Ghost Rider to be gathering intelligence, preparing for some desperate last stand. Instead, we're letting them walk into a trap of their own making, Rachel finished. The doctor had seen this side of her friend before, 15 years ago when the Ghost Riders ruled the territories. But this was different. Calculated strategy tempered by the widow's deeper understanding of what was truly worth fighting for. Sarah descended the tower steps, each footfall silent despite her spurs. The church interior had been transformed, in ways the Murphys would never suspect. Pews concealed ammunition caches, the altar now served as a command center, and the basement housed Rachel's expanded medical station. Every aspect of their defense had been carefully considered and prepared. "Remember," Sarah addressed the gathered defenders, her voice carrying the quiet authority that had once commanded the most effective posse in 3 territories. "Timing is everything. Let them believe their own assumptions. Let them think they're dealing with either scattered townspeople or a lone legend making her last stand." She moved among her people, checking positions and adjusting details with the precision that had made her legend. Each defender knew their role in the complex choreography she had planned. The widow's knowledge of her community combined with the Ghost Rider's tactical brilliance to create something entirely new. "Mrs. McKenzie." Tommy's voice carried urgency as he burst through the church doors, right on schedule. "Riders approaching from the south. Malcolm Murphy himself, with at least 20 men." Sarah allowed herself a small smile at the boys' performance. Anyone watching would see exactly what they expected, a frightened youth reporting to a desperate legend. "Very good, Tommy. Right on time. Pearl?" The shopkeeper stepped forward, her usual gentle demeanor replaced by steady determination. "Everyone's in position. The wagons are placed exactly as you specified." The loaded wagons that appeared to be preparation for evacuation were actually carefully positioned cover, their contents arranged to provide both protection and ammunition. Every apparent sign of surrender had been transformed into an element of defense. "James." Sarah turned to Wilson, who had insisted on taking his position despite his injuries. "Ranchers are ready," he confirmed. "First sign of Travis's men trying to use that tunnel, and they'll find themselves facing more than old mill dust." Sarah checked her pocket watch, a gift from Daniel she now wore openly. "They'll come in stages," she predicted, drawing on years of experience hunting men like the Murphys. "Malcolm's too careful to risk everything at once, no matter how confident he is. First wave will be expendable riders, testing our response." "And Travis?" Rachel asked, though she suspected she knew the answer. "He'll wait in reserve, thinking he's clever, wanting to watch his trap spring shut." Sarah's voice carried the cold certainty of someone who had spent years anticipating how evil men think. "Instead, he'll learn why the Ghost Riders were never caught in ambush." The morning sun climbed higher as Sarah made her final rounds. Every defender was in place, every angle covered, every escape route carefully planned and protected. To anyone watching, Silver Creek appeared vulnerable and defeated, but Sarah McKenzie knew better. Like the territory itself, there was strength hidden beneath the surface, waiting for the right moment to emerge. "It's time," she announced as the first riders appeared on the horizon. "Remember, we're not just fighting for buildings or businesses. We're fighting for everything Daniel believed in, everything we've built together. The Murphys think they're hunting a legend. Let's show them why some legends grow stronger with time." Thunder Mountain stood witness as Silver Creek prepared to reveal its true nature. Sarah McKenzie, widow and legend combined, felt both sides of herself align in perfect balance. The time for hiding was over. Now was the moment to show Malcolm, Murphy and his kind, why some women were worth both fearing and following, and why some communities could not be broken by fear or force. Malcolm Murphy rode into Silver Creek like a man who already owned it, his confidence radiating from every movement as his men spread out behind him in practice formation. The morning sun cast long shadows across the empty street, making his force appear even larger than it was. Sarah McKenzie watched from the church doorway, noting how James Murphy had positioned their best shooters on the flanks, while keeping their less experienced guns in the center, where they could be easily directed. "Quite a welcome party," Malcolm called out, reining his horse to a stop in the center of the street. His voice carried the false courtesy that had become his trademark. "Though I notice most of your brave townspeople seem to have lost their appetite for resistance. Smart of them." Sarah stepped forward, her movement measured and deliberate. The widow's calm demeanor masked the Ghost Rider's tactical assessment as she noted each rider's position, each weapon's placement. "They're exactly where they need to be, Mr. Murphy, as are you." A flash of uncertainty crossed Malcolm's face before his arrogance reasserted itself. "Still playing at defiance after what happened to your stable?" He gestured expansively at the burned ruins. "That was just a taste of what's coming, unless you're ready to be reasonable." "Reasonable." Sarah's voice carried quiet authority as she moved further into the street. Behind her, Tommy made a show of nervously backing toward the church, drawing the attention of Murphy's men exactly as planned. "Like you were reasonable with the Peterson place, with Wilson's ranch?" "Business is business," James Murphy cut in, his professional demeanor momentarily slipping to reveal irritation. "You forced our hand with your interference. Now it's time to accept reality." The morning wind carried the scent of sage and gunpowder as Sarah continued her careful advance. Every step was calculated to draw attention, to make herself the focus of every eye. The Ghost Rider in her counted weapons and angles, while the widow noted how the townspeople maintained their carefully rehearsed positions. "Reality," Sarah repeated softly, coming to a stop in the precise spot she had chosen. "Let's talk about reality, Mr. Murphy, about how you think you're springing a trap when you're actually walking into one." Malcolm's laugh held more nervousness than humor. "A trap? I count 30 guns to your one, widow. Or should I say, Ghost Rider?" His hand dropped casually to his gun belt. "Your reputation might have meant something once, but times change. Legends fade, do they?" Sarah's smile never reached her eyes. Or do they just learn new tricks? The signal came as planned, Pearl Sullivan's broom clattering against her porch steps in a seemingly careless pattern. To Murphy's men, it was just another sound in a quiet town. To Sarah's people, it confirmed that Travis Murphy's force had taken their bait, moving into position behind the old mill exactly as anticipated. "Last chance," Sarah announced, her voice carrying to every corner of the street. "Ride out now. Leave Silver Creek to those who built it, or learn why some legends grow stronger with time." "Enough of this." Malcolm's patience visibly frayed. "Take her." Two of his men moved forward, confident in their superior numbers. They made it exactly 3 steps before the first part of Sarah's trap revealed itself. The loaded wagons that had appeared to be evacuation preparation suddenly sprouted rifles, their positions creating perfect crossfire zones. Murphy's men found themselves caught in the open, every attempt to seek cover pushing them exactly where Sarah had planned for them to go. Impressive, James Murphy admitted, his professional eye recognizing the tactical advantage they'd surrendered. But you forget about Travis. By now he's... A series of explosions cut him off, followed by shouts of confusion from behind the mill. Sarah allowed herself a small smile, remembering how the Ghost Riders had used similar tricks to flush out ambushes. Through the old tunnel? The one your scouts so carefully reconnoitered? She shook her head. Wilson's men have been waiting. There since dawn. Your brother just rode his force right into their welcome party. Malcolm's composure cracked as he realized how completely they'd been outmaneuvered. His hand dropped to his gun, but Sarah was already moving. The widow's grace merged with the Ghost Rider's speed as she drew and fired in one fluid motion. Malcolm's gun went spinning away before he could clear leather, while her second shot disarmed James with surgical precision. "Now!" Sarah called out, her voice ringing with command authority. Pearl's mirrors flashed brilliant morning sunlight into the eyes of Murphy's remaining men, while hidden defenders emerged from every doorway and window. The trap closed like a steel jaw, transforming the quiet street into a killing ground where every angle and position had been carefully calculated. "This is what you forced us to become," Sarah announced to the surrounded gang, her voice carrying the weight of both justice and protection. Not just scattered townspeople, not just a lone legend, but something stronger than either, a community that knows how to fight as one. The morning sun climbed higher over Thunder Mountain as Silver Creek revealed its true nature. Sarah. McKenzie stood in the street she had defended for 15 years, feeling both sides of herself working in perfect harmony. The widow's wisdom had shaped the trap. The Ghost Rider's skill had sprung it. Together, they had created something the Murphys had never expected to face, a legend that had learned to build as well as destroy. Victory's sweetness lasted mere moments before the situation shifted. Sarah McKenzie recognized the change in Malcolm Murphy's expression, even before the sound of approaching riders reached her ears. The thunder of hooves coming from the west meant only one thing. The Murphys had prepared their own contingency plans. "Reinforcements," James Murphy called out, his professional mask cracking into a genuine smile despite his disarmed state. "Did you think we wouldn't have men held in reserve, Ghost Rider? That we wouldn't plan for your little town's resistance?" Sarah maintained her position in the street, the widow's calm masking the Ghost Rider's rapid tactical assessment. Through the morning haze, she could see at least 20 more riders approaching, led by a figure she recognized from wanted posters, Carson Pike, a notorious gun hand known for his brutality. "Rachel," Sarah called out, her voice steady despite the complications. "Signal Wilson's men. Plan Thunder is now in effect." The doctor's quick footsteps retreated toward the church as Sarah kept her attention fixed on the approaching threat. "Your trap's about to become your tomb," Malcolm gloated, finding new confidence in the approaching reinforcements. "Should have taken our original offer, widow. Now things are going to get considerably messier." Sarah allowed herself a small smile, one that carried echoes of old hunts across 3 territories. "Mr. Murphy, did you really think I wouldn't expect this? That the Ghost Rider's reputation was built on failing to anticipate her opponent's moves?" The thunder of hooves grew louder, but something else threaded through the sound, a high, sharp whistle that carried across the morning air. To Murphy's men, it might have seemed like a bird call or the wind through the canyon. To Sarah's people, it was the signal they'd prepared for. Pearl Sullivan's voice rang out clear and strong. "Waters rising." The words seemed nonsensical. To the Murphy gang, But they triggered a carefully choreographed sequence of events. The townspeople, who had appeared to be cowering behind wagons and in doorways, suddenly shifted positions with practiced efficiency. Sarah's careful planning, combining the widow's knowledge of the town with the Ghost Rider's tactical experience, revealed its deeper layers. "You see, Mr. Murphy," Sarah explained as her people moved with fluid grace to their new positions. "Silver Creek got its name honestly. The water table here runs high and fast. Any significant rain up in Thunder Mountain, and the old mining tunnels flood within hours." As if summoned by her words, the sound of rushing water emerged from the old mill where Travis Murphy's men had been trapped. The planned explosion hadn't just cut off their attack, it had breached one of the underground water channels that Sarah had carefully mapped during her 15 years as the widow. Wilson's men weren't just waiting to ambush Travis. Sarah continued, watching understanding dawn in James Murphy's professional eyes. They were positioning charges at key structural points. Right now, your brother and his men are being forced to higher ground, right into the positions we prepared for them. Carson Pike's reinforcements thundered into town, but they found themselves facing a transformed battlefield. The flooding tunnels had forced Travis's men to emerge exactly where Sarah's defenders had anticipated, creating chaos among the new arrivals. The morning sun caught the water now seeping up through the street's packed earth, turning firm ground treacherous for horses. The Ghost Riders used to say that the best trap is the one your enemy thinks they've escaped, Sarah observed, as Pike's men struggled to maintain formation on the increasingly unstable ground. But the widow in me learned something more valuable. Sometimes the land itself can be your strongest ally. Malcolm's face twisted with fury as he watched his carefully planned counterattack dissolve into confusion. "Pike!" he shouted. "Push through them! They're just farmers and shopkeepers!" But Sarah's people had already adapted to the changing conditions, their positions carefully chosen to take advantage of both the flooding and the morning sun. Pearl's mirrors flashed with renewed purpose, while the blacksmith's scattered caltrops found deadly purchase in the softening earth. "Now," Sarah commanded, her voice carrying the quiet authority that had once commanded the most feared posse in 3 territories. The church bell rang out, not in alarm, but in a specific pattern that triggered the next phase of their defense. Wilson's ranchers emerged from their hidden positions, their horses sure-footed on the treacherous ground they knew so well. They drove Pike's men toward the flooded areas, while Sarah's sharpshooters maintained covering fire from the buildings above. "This is your last chance," Sarah announced, her voice carrying over the chaos. "Surrender now, before the water rises further. Even Carson Pike's reputation won't mean much if his men are fighting belly-deep in floodwater." The morning sun climbed higher over Thunder Mountain as Silver Creek's defenders demonstrated why local knowledge, combined with careful planning, could overcome even superior numbers. Sarah McKenzie stood firm in the midst of the confusion, both sides of herself working in perfect harmony. The widow's understanding of her town's secrets had merged with the Ghost Rider's tactical brilliance to create a defense that adapted and strengthened with each new challenge. The morning sun reached its zenith over Thunder Mountain as the battle for Silver Creek approached its decisive moment. Carson Pike's men found themselves trapped between rising floodwaters and the coordinated defense of townspeople who knew every inch of their home. Sarah McKenzie watched as the professional gunman's confidence crumbled in the face of a situation his experience hadn't prepared him for. "It's over, Pike!" Sarah called out, her voice carrying the quiet authority that had once commanded the most feared posse in 3 territories. "Your horses can't maintain position in this mud. Your men are surrounded, and the water's still rising. Make your choice before it's made for you." Pike's response came in the form of gunfire, but his Shot went wide as his horse struggled for footing in the increasingly treacherous ground. Sarah's return fire was precise and measured, striking his gun hand with surgical accuracy. The weapon splashed into the rising water as Pike fought to control his panicking mount. "Impressive marksmanship," James Murphy observed from where he and Malcolm remained under guard. "But you've overlooked something crucial." His professional demeanor cracked into a cold smile. "Travis is still unaccounted for." As if summoned by his brother's words, a shout came from the direction of the church. Sarah turned to see Travis Murphy emerging onto the roof, dragging a struggling Tommy with him. The young man had been positioned as a lookout, but Travis must have found another way up through the building. "Enough games!" Travis shouted, holding Tommy dangerously close to the roof's edge. His free hand clutched his ever-present matchbox. "Order your people to stand down, Ghost Rider, or the boy takes a long fall. After that, well..." He shook the matchbox meaningfully. "Churches burn real nice, I hear." The street fell silent as Sarah faced this new threat. The widow in her felt fear for Tommy, while the Ghost Rider calculated angles and options. Both sides of herself worked together, drawing on 15 years of building and protecting to find the right solution. "You're right about one thing, Travis," Sarah replied, her voice carrying clearly in the tense silence. "Enough games." She holstered her guns with deliberate slowness. "But you're wrong about who's really trapped here." Travis's laugh held an edge of hysteria. "Trapped? I'm the one with the advantage now. I'm the one who's going to..." His words got off as Rachel Cooper's voice rang out from the church bell tower. "The Lord helps those who help themselves." The coded phrase triggered a sequence of events that happened so quickly, observers later had trouble describing them accurately. Pearl Sullivan's mirrors flashed from multiple angles, momentarily blinding Travis. In that same instant, Tommy executed the self-defense move Sarah had carefully taught him, dropping and rolling as Wilson's daughter Rose emerged from her hidden position behind the church's cross, a water barrel poised to cascade over both Travis and his matchbox. Sarah was moving before Travis could recover, her years of experience allowing her to scale the church wall using handholds she had personally. Checked and reinforced. She reached the roof just as Travis, sputtering and soaked, tried to regain his footing on the now slick shingles. "Your brother was right about one thing," Sarah said softly as she advanced on the youngest Murphy. "Legends do change with time. The Ghost Rider would have shot you where you stand, but Sarah McKenzie learned something more valuable, how to build something worth protecting and how to protect what's worth building." Travis's desperate lunge toward her was predictable, almost pitiable. Sarah sidestepped with the grace of someone who had spent years anticipating her opponent's moves. A precise strike to his shoulder sent him sprawling, while her other hand caught his collar before he could slide off the roof entirely. "This is what you never understood," she continued, securing him firmly. "True strength isn't in how much you can destroy, it's in what you choose to preserve." Below, Carson Pike's men were surrendering to the inevitable as the floodwaters continued to rise. Malcolm and James Murphy watched in impotent fury as their carefully planned operation dissolved in the face of a defense they hadn't believed possible. Sarah descended from the roof with her prisoner, her movements measured and precise. The morning light caught the silver in her hair as she rejoined her people, each one standing proud despite their various bumps and bruises. They had faced professional killers and won, not through superior firepower but through cooperation, planning, and a deep understanding of what they were fighting for. "It's done," she announced, her voice carrying the weight of both justice and mercy. "Sheriff Hampton will be returning with the federal marshal's office." She turned to face Malcolm Murphy directly. "Your reputation's finished, Mr. Murphy. The story of how your entire operation was defeated by a widow and her community will spread faster than any tale of your supposed prowess." The morning sun painted Thunder Mountain in colors of victory as Sarah McKenzie stood among her people. The widow, who had built something worth defending, and the Ghost Rider, who had remembered how to defend it, had finally, truly become one person. Her legend would grow, but not as a lone avenger. Instead, she would be remembered as someone who had learned that the greatest strength comes not from standing alone, but from standing together for something worth protecting. The afternoon sun cast long shadows across Silver Creek as Federal Marshal Barnes surveyed the scene before him. The floodwaters had begun to recede, leaving behind mud-streaked streets and clear evidence of the morning's conflict. Sarah McKenzie stood beside him, her posture reflecting both the widow's dignity and the Ghost Rider's vigilance as she provided her report. "Quite a operation you put together here," Barnes observed, watching his deputies lead the shackled Murphy brothers toward the waiting prison wagon. "When I got Sheriff Hampton's telegram about trouble in Silver Creek, I expected to find another town in ruins. Instead, I find the Murphy gang neatly packaged for transport and a community standing stronger than ever." "The town defended itself," Sarah replied simply, though her hand rested comfortably on her gun belt. "I just helped them remember how." Barnes studied her with knowing eyes. He had been a young deputy when the Ghost Riders were active, had seen firsthand the justice they brought to places the law couldn't reach. "You know, there are still stories told about the Ghost Rider, about how she disappeared 15 years ago. Some said she died, others claimed she'd found something worth more than hunting men." Perhaps both were true in their way," Sarah answered, watching as Rachel Cooper tended to the few injuries sustained during the battle. "The woman I was did die, in a sense, but what grew in her place turned out to be stronger than any legend. The aftermath of victory revealed itself in dozens of small moments throughout the afternoon. Pearl Sullivan organized cleanup crews with the same efficiency she'd shown in coordinating defenders. The blacksmith's forge burned hot again, this time repairing tools instead of crafting weapons. Tommy moved among the townspeople with new confidence, his brush with danger having forged something stronger than fear. "The Murphy gang had a reputation," Barnes continued as they walked the muddy street. 3 territories were afraid to move against them. Yet a widow and a small town managed what territorial authorities couldn't. People will want to know how. Sarah paused to help Wilson lift a fallen wagon back onto its wheels, her movements displaying both the widow's care and the Ghost Rider's strength. "Tell them the truth, Marshal. Tell them about a community that chose to stand together instead of falling apart, about people who learned that building something worth defending means being ready to defend it." Carson Pike and his men sat under heavy guard, their professional demeanor shattered by defeat at the hands of those they'd considered beneath their notice. Travis Murphy's wild eyes darted between the mud-soaked matchbox at his feet and the church roof where his final gambit had failed. Malcolm and James Murphy maintained their silence, but their expressions spoke volumes about men facing the end of their imagined empire. "Sarah!" Rachel called out, hurrying toward them with purpose in her stride. "We found something in the old mill tunnel, something you need to see." The discovery proved to be a cache of documents hidden by the Murphys during their occupation of the town. Letters, contracts, and ledgers that revealed the true scope of their operation, and the names of those who had helped them establish their reign of terror across 3 territories. "This is enough evidence to bring down more than just the Murphy gang," Barnes noted, examining the papers with growing satisfaction. "Corrupt judges, bought officials, compromised lawmen, their whole network exposed." "The Ghost Rider would have used these names as a hunting list," Sarah observed quietly. "But perhaps justice is better served by letting the law handle them properly this time." Throughout the afternoon, residents from neighboring towns began arriving, drawn by news of Silver Creek's victory. They found not a community celebrating triumph through violence, but one already focused on rebuilding. Sarah watched as her people naturally incorporated the newcomers into their work, sharing both the burden and the sense of accomplishment. "You've built something remarkable here," Barnes said as the sun began its descent behind Thunder Mountain. "Not just a town that survived the Murphy gang, but a model for how communities can protect themselves without losing their soul to violence." Sarah's hand found the marshal's badge she now wore openly, feeling its weight as both symbol and responsibility. Daniel used to say that true civilization isn't about avoiding conflict, but about choosing how to face it, about building something stronger than fear or force. The evening brought a different kind of gathering to Silver Creek. Tables appeared in the street, laden with food prepared by townspeople, celebrating not just their victory, but their transformation. Sarah moved among them, noting how the skills learned in defense now served to strengthen their bonds. Pearl's signals became jokes shared between neighbors. The blacksmith's organization of work crews flowed as smoothly as his coordination of defenders had. "Still planning to rebuild the stable?" Rachel asked, joining her friend as darkness began to fall. Sarah looked toward the burned ruins that had sparked their resistance. "Yes," she replied, "but differently this time. The widow in me learned the value of building something worth protecting. The Ghost Rider taught me how to protect it. Now it's time to build something that honors both lessons." The stars emerged over Thunder Mountain as Silver Creek began to truly understand what they had accomplished. They had faced professional killers and won not through superior force, but through unity and strategy. More importantly, they had proved that a community could defend itself without losing its fundamental decency, that strength and mercy could coexist in the same heart. Up next, you've got two more standout stories right on your screen. If this one hit the mark, you won't want to pass these up. Just click and check them out. And don't forget to subscribe and turn on the notification bell so you don't miss any upload from us.